Hello and welcome to CAEL 302, the writing webinar. This is Brandy speaking, and I will be your presenter today. So as we're getting started here, I'm going to remind you that the microphones in Zoom are muted, but we're going to use the chat box to communicate. So if you've got any questions at all about the CAEL test, kindly put those questions right into the chat box and I will answer them as I go. I'm going to be asking you lots of questions of my own today, because this is an academic writing webinar. And the last thing I want you to do is to sit back and watch for 2 hours. I don't think that's a very effective way to learn. So if you would get involved with the lesson and answer the questions for practice that we're going to do today, you can use the Zoom chat. We're turning this into an online study session as a group. So that would be great. Now let's do a sound check. Can I have one of you please just type the word hello into the chat box? Let's make sure that the microphone is working before we proceed. We've got lots to cover. Oh, there we go. We're getting some hellos. So hello and welcome. I'm glad you can hear me okay. If something should go wrong with the tech halfway through, if all of a sudden you can't hear anything, for instance, please let me know about it right away in the Zoom chat. If it's an issue with my own computer, I'll fix it if I can. But if it's something on your end, the best advice I'll give you right now as we're starting is to log out of Zoom and then just log right back in again. And that should fix any slight glitch that could occur. You never know with technology, right? Now, you're welcome to take notes today, but quite honestly, I think as long as you follow along and use the chat box to communicate, that's probably the best way that you can be actively engaged. You are welcome to take screenshots of any slides you find useful, but do know that within the next 24 hours, we are going to email you with some helpful links that will allow you to continue to study at home. So the first link in the email will bring you to a survey. That part's completely optional. So if you want to give feedback, of course, you're welcome to do so, but you don't have to. The second link will take you to a study pack of materials that are geared towards this academic writing session. So again, if you miss anything, you can have a look through that study pack. It's going to summarize what we're doing today. And last but not least, there will be a link that will take you to a recorded version of this CAEL 302 webinar. We keep all of our webinars recorded on our YouTube channel. So you could actually go to YouTube yourself and find it, but again, we'll make it easy for you by issuing you the link right in the email. So by clicking that, it'll open the recording. So if you can't stay for the full 2 hours today, we've got you covered that way. You can always rewatch later on at your leisure. So I have a few people writing in already saying they can't stay for the whole session today. No problem. Just watch again the recorded version and you can catch up what you miss. All right, so this is me. I'm going to quickly introduce myself and then I want to know a little bit about you. So again, I'm Brandy and I am an online instructor for the CAEL test. I've been helping students prepare for CAEL for about 5.5 years now, but I've been teaching in total for more than 25 years. I currently live in Vancouver, which is on Canada's west coast out here in British Columbia. What about the rest of you? Where do you live right now? Are we all settled in Canada already? Perhaps you are currently outside of Canada and looking to move here. Let me know about that in the Zoom chat. And while I'm waiting for you to put that information in the Zoom, I'm going to remind you about some of our success stories, if you will. We do have what's called an academic success bundle. And when it comes time for you to register for your CAEL test, if you use the code CAEL25, you're going to get 25% off of the cost of your actual test, plus all of these free study prep materials. So all of these items listed here, like the practice test, the CAEL Accelerate program, etc., the practice test plus, those would normally cost money in the online bookstore, but we're going to bundle all of these products, including 5 free practice tests, into the success bundle, and you'll have that to help you study as well. So that's our gift to you as you undertake this academic journey, if you will. Now, I've got a couple of people letting me know in the Zoom chat that you're out here in British Columbia too, which is neat. We've got Lucianne in Vancouver, Roy is in Port Coquitlam, Judith, on the other hand, is in Alberta, so our next door neighbor. So we all seem to be focused out here on the West Coast so far from the people that have written in. So I guess it's just Judith that is 1 hour ahead of us. It's 10:30 for you in the morning. The rest of us are kind of just getting our day started at 9:30, but welcome one and all. Over the course of the next 2 hours or so, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to start off with just an introduction or overview to what the CAEL test is all about and how it's structured. We're focusing today on the writing in particular. So I'll introduce the 2 writing tasks to you. We're going to talk about the long writing piece, which is sort of like an essay, and the short writing piece, which is only one paragraph. And at the very, very end, I will run down the free study materials we have and also introduce you to the online bookstore. So here we go with our overview. We call this test the CAEL. It's spelled this way because each letter in the word CAEL stands for another word. This is called an acronym. So the whole test is actually referred to as the Canadian Academic English Language Test. So Canadian, meaning you're going to take it to study here in Canada. It's 100% Canadian designed, and academic in the sense that it's the type of language you would expect to be using at the first year university or college level. That's what we mean by academic. The entire CAEL test is delivered on the computer. So regardless of whether you take this test from your home computer or in a testing center, you'll be doing the whole thing from start to finish in one sitting right in front of the computer online. We call the CAEL an integrated test because for the most part, you're going to be integrating or combining the different language skills to both understand meaning and produce meaning yourselves. So for instance, sometimes you might be reading through an academic passage and answering questions about that, but then later on you might be asked to write using some of the ideas that you've encountered in that reading passage and so on, or perhaps speak about something you've learned. So it's a matter of using the different elements of language, such as reading, listening, writing, and speaking, and combining them in different ways to produce that meaning. Most people would take CAEL if they're looking to study at a Canadian university or college. So pretty much every major institution across Canada does accept the CAEL score. You could also, though, take this test if you were pursuing a career designation. So we listed one example on screen here, the CICC. This deals with your immigration consultancy field, but there are many more. So if you're not sure if your professional field, if you're already undergoing or working through a career, if you do need a professional designation, have a look on the CAEL.ca website. You'll see a big list of all of the organizations that would accept CAEL as a score. Can I ask quickly what brings all of you to the CAEL test? Are you looking to study then in Canada in the near future? The terms here in Canada start again in September. So college and university has just wrapped with final exams, and they'll be starting again in September. So I'm just curious. I always like to know what the purpose is, as sometimes that helps me gear you up a little bit more and get you ready. Yeah, okay, so studying, yeah, sure. Judith already has her test booked for the end of May. Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you're here. You'll get some writing tips anyway. But yeah, most people would take it for studies. Hopefully you've been researching all the different schools, so you've got a good sense of where it is you want to go. By the time you're finished taking this CAEL test, it should give you a very good understanding of your readiness to proceed with your studies, if that's indeed why you're taking the test. It also, if you're looking to use this as that professional designation, it'll give you a very good understanding, and your employer too, about your readiness with your language skills as well. So I mentioned earlier that you could take this test from home. You have to be living currently, though, in one of these 13 countries listed here on screen. So far, everyone that's written into the Zoom chat is in Canada. So that would qualify. Again, some people just like the comfort of home, of course. If you don't live right near a testing center, then perhaps it's easier to stay home and take this test, as you don't have to commute. Be aware, though, that you do need to download the software onto your home computer for the platform in order to access the test itself. And there is proctoring. A proctor is usually a human, sometimes AI assisted, that has eyes on you through your computer camera. So again, you are in your home and the comfort of your home, but there is always security making sure that you are the one taking the test, etc. Or again, if you would rather just go to a testing room and maybe be reassured that staff is on site to help just in case a tech glitch happens or something to that effect, you also have that option. So it's good to have choices. You need to be comfortable, of course, taking this test too. Roy has just written in to say that you're looking to take the test within 2 to 3 months. So you're giving yourself a good chunk of time to prepare, and that's great. I like to see that as well. It takes time, as we all know, to develop those language skills, especially at the academic level, right? Oh, and Lucienne is taking it on Friday. My goodness. Well, again, at least today you're going to get some really helpful writing tips. So we'll see what we can do for you. Good luck, all of you that are taking this test. So I'm showing you right now the 5 parts of CAEL. So up top where it says CAEL Part 1, speaking, that is the fastest part of this whole test because you're only speaking. You've got 3 responses to deliver. 10 minutes and then you're finished. But by the time you get to part 2 and all the way down, you'll notice those red square brackets on screen. And that's showing you where the language skills are being integrated or combined together. So part 2 is all about reading, but you will have one speaking response to deliver based on what you've learned in the reading passages. Part 3 is focusing on listening, but again, there is one speaking question about the listening aspects. In part 4, the good news is you're finished with the speaking. No more speaking to do, but you will be reading, listening, and writing. And this is the piece where you deliver or write a longer passage, like an essay. So if you look to the timing elements on the right-hand side, you'll notice that part 4 is the longest part of the test. You are given 35 minutes at the maximum to write your essay. So that's why. In part 5 here, you're still reading, listening, and writing, but it's a short writing response, a paragraph of about 100 words. And that's why the time is quite a bit shorter in that section. So overall, it would take the average test taker just under 3 hours to complete CAEL. So it is a major exam, but you would have up to 3.5 hours total if you used every second available to you. All right. And again, from part 2 to 5, where you're reading or listening, you're always going to have a topic that is rooted in either the arts or the science background. So there's a little bit of variety to suit everybody's interest and so on. I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. And again, here's your time, maximum 3.5, but you'll probably be finished just a little bit below that, hopefully 3 hours or a bit less. So those topics for your listening and reading, I've got lots of examples here on screen, and this list is not exhaustive. You could certainly have different topics. But the good news is whatever you're reading about or listening to on this test, the information is introductory. Yes, it's academic, but it's introductory in the sense that you don't have to have any background knowledge. So provided your language skills are strong enough, your vocab and your comprehension and so on, you will be able to understand the material, and it's using the source material that you're going to do to answer the questions on the test. So that's the good news there. So let's talk about scoring. We've already got a few of you that have let me know in the Zoom chat box what your score requirement would be. I see Judith has mentioned you need at least a 70, a band 70. And I was just about to say that's about average. Most schools will require of you to earn at least a band 70. So if you look maybe at the bottom of the score chart to begin with, band 10 would be really entry level. We call that low beginner. So 10 to 20, we're just developing our skills. And you'll notice that the scores for CAEL are always in even increments of 10. There are no half scores at all. So you're going to get a score report that shows you your score out of an even number of 10, if that makes sense. So as we count further up this list, you'll notice that the top score is a band 90. If you receive an 80 or a 90 on this test, you're already demonstrating expert proficiency. So if you can do that, well done. You're ahead of the game, as we say. But again, band 70, if you look at the descriptor right beside that, a band 70 communicator in English would have adept communication skills. So what that would mean is that you already have a fairly strong foundation of language skills. So you can understand, for the most part, what you're reading about, listening to. You can communicate and share your ideas through writing and speaking, but there still will be some limitations. So a few weaker areas that you're still undergoing improvements in. And that makes sense, right? When you're starting out at a school or even starting in a career, you're not expected to know it all on day one. So the idea is to come in with that strong foundation. And as you use these skills daily, you're going to continue to improve them. So maybe eventually, if you were to retest CAEL in a few years, perhaps you would be a band 80 or 90. We never know. But again, I would advise all of you to double check with the school to which you're applying. Every single school or every single employer sets its own minimum score. So your score might be different from other people's. It's wise for you to know now what you need so that you'll have a better opportunity to achieve it. Anyway, enough about scoring. Let's get right into the writing task overview. So we've already looked at all 5 parts briefly to see what they're all about. Today's webinar, though, is all about writing. So we're only going to be looking down here at the parts 4 and 5, where the long piece of writing and the short piece of writing occur. So there's a slight difference in time and word count and such. So let's quickly review that before we get into our skills development. The long writing piece that you do in part 4, it requires of you at least 250 words in length. And what that might look like on a computer screen or if you're typing away, probably 3 or maybe even 4 paragraphs. So that would be accurate for word count. There's no maximum. So honestly, if you had time, you're given 35 minutes total. If you had time to add another paragraph, as long as it's on topic, you can go over the 250 words. That's fine. But you need at least 250 to achieve the highest score you could in that area of the test. Here's the tricky part though. You are going to be required, as in you absolutely must, use information from both the long reading and listening lecture that you've already just completed. So you can imagine yourself in the testing room. You've just read through that passage and answered questions. You've listened to a lecture and answered questions. And now it comes time to use ideas from both of those source materials in order to write out the essay. So that one is the most academic, I would say. It's probably one of the more challenging parts of the test. So you have to know what an essay is and how to structure it. And we'll look at that together today. The short piece of writing, on the other hand, it's the very final part of the CAEL test, so part 5. The good news is it's less than half the length. It's only 100 words. So that would look like about 7 to 8 sentences. And when I say sentences, I mean academic sentences that are a little longer and more complex. So if you can imagine that, no problem at all. Again, maximum, you can go over that 100 words, no trouble there, but you need at least 100 words. You get 10 minutes, which I know sounds fairly quick, but again, you're only writing 100 words. You're answering one question. And you only have to use either the reading or the lecture source. The test instructions will tell you which one. So again, it's cutting your workload down in half. You don't have to consult both source passages. It's just one. Take a few details, probably 3 main points, develop them, and you're done. So it's similar to a comprehension question. And I'll show you examples of this as we go through the webinar, just in case you're not sure what a paragraph looks like or what an essay looks like. So if you look, this is your computer screen. If you look at the very top in the left-hand corner, it will tell you what part of the test we're on. So this says part 4, long writing, and this is your instructions screen. There is no timer on the screen quite yet. It's just literally the instructions telling you what you will do. So during this test, you are wearing a headset. You will hear a recorded voice read out loud these instructions to you. So I'll do that just this once so that you have a sense about what it would feel like to take the test. So that recorded voice would say, your professor asks you a question. You will write an answer on the next page. Use the information from the reading and lecture. Answer the question in your own words. Write at least 250 words. You have 35 minutes to complete this task. Okay, so these instructions you're going to know off by heart before you take the real test, because as you study, you get familiar with how the test is structured. So if you don't want to just sit and wait for these instructions to be read out loud to you, you can look in the top right corner of the screen and see a next button. So if you clicked the next button, you would skip over the reading of these instructions and it would take you simply to the test question a little bit more quickly. On the other hand, if you do listen to the full instructions and wait, as soon as the instructions are finished, the computer will move you forward automatically. So either way, you'll arrive on this page where you actually have the test question and so on, but you do have a little bit of control over your timing per se. You can move ahead a little bit more quickly. Notice though, and this is the important piece. So you're looking right now at the actual test question. In the very top right corner is your timer. Now you're going to start with 35 minutes on screen. That next button, you're going to see it on every screen. So again, if you were to finish typing out your answer here below, before time is up, you could click next and move forward, but you can see there's no back button. This is the important part. So you could never in the future then change your mind and go back to a past test question to make improvements. So only click the next when you're ready to move forward. And the other thing to know is that you don't get to carry any extra time with you into the next part. So every single screen you begin, it's going to have its own preset number of minutes. So it's helpful to note these things. Now looking at your writing screens, and it will look the same in the format anyway for part 5, but this is the long writing piece. You'll notice there are 3 tabs here. So we are currently on the instructions page, and that's why the instructions is sort of like a white color. It's like it's been clicked or selected. And right below those 3 menu tabs, you can see the instructions. And they talk about what we've just talked about. They give you your word count. They do review how you'll be scored, etc. I don't think you're going to need to read the instructions when you're taking the real test, because again, you're going to know these things coming into CAEL, so you'll save your time. You'll notice there are two other buttons there, the reading passage and the lecture notes. So you can click on those and it's going to bring up the source material that you've already worked through. So you could actually review those materials while you're writing, and that's helpful. On the right-hand side, you'll notice the question. So this is an example question from a real CAEL test, a past test, I guess. So this one says, what factor do you think influences us the most when determining what and how we eat? So whatever you read about and listened to in the reading and listening passages, it would be about food and influencing. All of the questions relate back to the source material. Now, when you're typing into that white space, that's where you complete the entire response. You'll notice that there are editing features right above. You can choose to use them or not. It really is up to you. It's not going to affect your score, but some of us like to bold words, or we might copy and paste and delete and so on. So feel free to use those. Your word counter is always on screen as well. So word count here, it says 9, and you can see as an example, we wrote, this is where you will type your response. So as you continue to add words, of course, the word counter shifts. Again, your question's always facing you. No matter which button you click, you're always going to see the question and your writing answer, which is helpful. So when you click on this reading passage, as I said, your reading passage you've already worked through comes up, and you can skim through and pull out ideas to help you type your answer. With the lecture itself, you cannot listen again to the lecture that you've already heard and answered questions on. But luckily for you, the computer gives you a summarized outline, which is what you see here. So there are lots of bulleted points and subheadings and so on. But by skim reading that, it should jog your memory enough that you'll remember back to the main points and the details. So your job is just to pull out a few details that actually answer this question, talking about the factors that influence how and what we eat. Now, if you choose to take CAEL on your home computer, you cannot take paper notes, by the way. In a testing room, you've got paper and pen if you want to jot down some ideas. But on your home computer, you have to download the software. You're going to see this button somewhere on your computer screen. It's called the Scratch Pad. And the Scratch Pad is literally like an online notepad, if you will. It looks exactly like this. You can see the editing features there all down the left-hand side. So you can type whatever notes or ideas you have into that little scratch pad. Feel free to move that little scratch pad around your screen or minimize it or exit out altogether. It's really up to you, but it's designed simply to keep you on track and to remember which details you want to include. The reason you have an online notepad is because with security, if you take this test from your home computer, you are not allowed to have anything else on your desk. It's just the computer and you, basically. So the proctor will double check you don't have any papers around, etc. So that's why we give you the online notepad so you can still take notes. Okay, so enough about all that sort of background info. Let's get right into the academic writing skills and do some skills practice. So academic writing, bear in mind, is very, very different from the type of language we use in our day-to-day communication. So when we're writing academically, like for a test for the university level, as we're doing here today, we have to make sure that we state our clear topic right at the beginning. Our very first paragraph will be an introduction. It'll be short for CAEL, maybe 2 sentences, 3 at the most, but you must state your main topic, and everything we write about all the way through has to be about that main topic. So stay on topic at all costs. Make sure you fully answer the question. So many questions in the academic world have almost 2 parts to them, like this one does. We have to address how and what we eat, how these factors influence. So don't forget part of the question or you won't have a complete answer. Again, we always back up our ideas with source material. So for the CAEL test, we are using ideas presented in the reading and the listening passages. You can bring in some of your own outside ideas if you've got personal life experience that makes sense, but you definitely want to make sure you are prioritizing the source material first, because that's going to help your score the best. We also need to structure our writing. So an essay always has multiple paragraphs. Every time there's a new main idea, we have a new paragraph. And we use transitions and connecting words to make sure that all the ideas are flowing together smoothly. When we speak or write at the academic setting, we're not using short, simple sentences, we hope. We're speaking in complete sentences that are grammatically correct. Hopefully, you've been studying your grammar at home as well. And if you are able to produce complex sentence structures and demonstrate a good variety of the grammar and the sentence structures, you will score better on the CAEL test. The vocabulary too, we cannot and should not be using any type of slang or idiomatic language. That would be far too casual for an academic setting. All the vocab we use, we hope that it's going to be quite precise, very interesting, of course, and specific. So for instance, don't use words like stuff and thing. Those words are so common and vague, they don't fit into the academic tone. We always want to choose words wisely, as we say, that convey the right meaning in a very precise way. And last but not least, we minimize or hopefully don't have any grammar or spelling mistakes. Try to get it as correct as you can before the time is up. So here's our long writing piece. I'm going to do a quick true or false activity with you just to see what you've learned from the intro, and then we'll get into some test question things. So true or false, let me know in the Zoom chat, please. Grammar is the most important part of the long writing. Would you say true or would you say false? I know we just talked about skills you'll need to demonstrate, and grammar is one of them, but what do you think? Is it the most important part of the writing you'll produce on the test? Would you say true or false? Write the word in the Zoom chat if you wish. Oh, I'm getting some explanations with your answers. I like that. Luciana is saying it's false, but it's still very important. You know what? That's the perfect answer. Let's just accept that and move on. You're right, it is false. Grammar is not the most important part. Frankly, it's more important to make sure that we understand your ideas. Even if you have a grammar mistake, as long as we can still understand your idea, that's more important. But as you say, Luciana, grammar is still important. I agree with that as well. Right. So the raters, the rating team is a group of human beings, by the way, that are going to be reading through anonymously the writing pieces you complete on the CAEL test. So they're going to have a look at your content details, your vocabulary, and then all of those grammar structures and sentence structures. So again, they're going to look at the big picture and they're not going to count mistakes. You're not going to lose points every time they catch a little grammar mistake. If you make a few minor mistakes, it's really not going to affect your score at all. But we definitely want you to have close to very strong grammar if you can. I think it's still important. What about the second point? So using contractions, and contractions are short forms of words that use apostrophes. And we've listed a few examples here, like don't and it's. So using contractions is acceptable. Would you say true or false? In an academic setting, what is your opinion on this? Perhaps you've taken English classes in the past and your teacher had a very strong opinion about this. It might depend a little bit on honestly where you were educated or where you grew up, or even how old we are. And I'll explain what I mean in a moment. A few of you are saying false, like we should not be using contractions in academic writing. I learned that rule myself way back. I did my university back in the 1990s. I'm dating myself here now too. And I was taught that rule as well, that, oh, we shouldn't be using contractions. It's not as academic. So we didn't use them. But as fashion changes, I guess so too, sometimes do language rules. It's acceptable to use a few contractions, a few. You're not going to use contractions all the way through your writing. Okay, so again, they're acceptable, but just use them sparingly. Once in a while is fine. It would depend a little bit on the idea you're expressing. So you'll have to use your best judgment. Okay, but again, if you put contractions all the way through, you will end up with a casual piece of writing, which would not be acceptable. I would say when in doubt, don't use them if you're worried about it. But if you sneak a couple of little contractions into the writing, don't worry about it. At least for the CAEL test, it is going to be just fine. Okay, now what about this one? The long writing must be a 5-paragraph essay. I hope this one's obvious, but I'll ask you first. We know we're writing an essay, and I already did say it has to be multi-paragraphs. What do you think? Is there a definite structure? Does it have to be a certain length, et cetera, et cetera? And I'm glad to see you're saying false. Yeah, there is a word count. We have to achieve at least 250 words, but there's no steadfast rule about how many paragraphs you need. You will have a brief introduction and a brief conclusion. So there are 2 paragraphs right there. But again, the middle part is up to you. It's how many ideas you have. I've seen sample responses from students who only had one middle paragraph, but they had so many great ideas, they still scored well. I've seen responses that have two middle paragraphs or even three. Again, it always depends on how many main ideas you have and then how well you develop them. Excellent. All right. Yeah. So again, we've established that. Just make sure that you always have a new paragraph every time you have a new main idea. That's the important part. Now, that rating team that I mentioned earlier, the first element or factor, I guess, that they'll be looking at throughout your writing is all about your content details. So those first 6 items speak to more or less what we've just discussed. We have to establish our topic in the opening. We're going to use as many specific details and examples from both the reading and listening sources as we can to fully develop these ideas. So there should be no doubt what your opinion or your viewpoint is as we're reading through your essay. Remember, point number 4, I'll say it again, you have to fully answer the question. And oftentimes there are 2 parts to the question. So don't make that careless mistake. I do see it sometimes where people get so carried away with the first part of the question that they completely forget to do the rest. And if that happens to you, you won't score well for your task fulfillment. So just make sure you understand the question and you are addressing the whole thing. Number 5, we've got that down pat now. We know it has to be 250 words minimum. And number 6, we're not going to repeat ideas. I've seen this happen a few times. I think people don't have any more ideas, so they just keep paraphrasing what they've already said. And that is not the way to go. So the stronger essay will develop unique reasons throughout. Again, as long as you've got 2 main reasons and plenty of support, you should be able to achieve the 250 word count minimum. These last ones here, numbers 7 to 10, are speaking to your use of those source materials. So you want to balance yourself, and this is important too. I would say if you could somehow find 2 details from the reading source and 2 details from the listening source from those passages and incorporate them into your essay somehow, that makes sense, then you're balancing out your work and you're going to validate what it is you're talking about with evidence in front of you. You're not just making your ideas up, you've actually got these pieces of evidence to support that you know what you're talking about. Don't just grab, say, 3 ideas from the reading and 1 from the listening. You'll still score well for content to a degree, but you want to balance them out as best you can. So that would be my biggest tip there as well. The other tip that I'll share is that it's important for you to try to paraphrase ideas. Never, ever just copy directly from the source material on the computer screen, because again, you'll do better for yourself, for your content, for your vocab, if the raters can see that you can phrase your ideas in your own words. The other 2 parts that the rating team will look at in this long writing essay that you're doing is the structure of the piece, like the organization. So again, in the opening, did you have a brief introductory statement? And then did you state your opinion and use those transitions to connect ideas together? The reader should be able to follow through your train of thought and it should make sense. So the idea should be in a logical order and so on. Paragraphing, again, will help us identify when you've got a new main idea to impart. The language use at the bottom is all about, again, your grammar, your spelling, your punctuation, your sentence construction. The more variety and the more complexity you use, the better your score will be. Vocab, again, we know it has to be academic, but we also try our best to showcase a variety of words. So don't get bogged down and repeat the same word 8 times throughout your essay. Try your best to use synonyms and paraphrased ideas when it makes sense to do so. All right, so again, we'll come back to those 3 elements as we look through our writing today. Of course, the first thing you do when you look at the long writing screen, this is a picture, a simulation of an at-home test, I guess. Of course, we have to read the question. So let's get into the question that we're going to develop together right now. So the question from this test that we're working through today says, what factor do you think influences us the most when determining how and what we eat? So I'm going to give you about 10 seconds just for your own mind to grab onto, say, 4 or 5 keywords from this question, and then I'm going to circle them on screen. This is the thought process I hope that we go through as we come up against a question. So I'm going to circle the first one. You notice it says what factor? In other words, this is a singular idea. It does not say what factors, plural, it says what factor. So that tells you you are going to choose one factor that you would have learned about in either the reading or listening passages. And whichever factor you come up with as your opinion, it is your opinion. What do you think? So there's not really a wrong answer, provided you can explain why you feel as you do. So you're picking a factor that you think influences us, meaning today, currently in society, what influences the modern human, if you will, the most. So you likely will have encountered several factors throughout the reading and listening, but you're going to pick the one that has the greatest influence on us today. And it has to connect with two things. There's a how and a what. So this is what I mean by two parts of the question. So how we eat and what we eat. We must make sure that we're addressing both parts. So we've read that question very carefully. The first thing you're going to do, and as quickly as you can, you have 35 minutes, but those minutes will tick away quickly, I think. So form your opinion. In this case, you're choosing one factor. That is what your opinion is going to be. I would recommend that you make an outline, a written outline. So again, either using the online notepad called Scratchpad or using paper and pen in the testing center. It's just really helpful to write down the factor at the top of the page and then skim through the source material to start pulling out the details or the evidence that back it up. I would spend even 3, possibly 4 minutes, no more than that, because if you can gather your ideas first, it's going to help you understand how many paragraphs you're going to have, making sure you've got a complete answer, etc. So when you're making your own outline, you are the only one who sees these ideas. So you don't have to worry about spelling or grammar, etc. You're not writing full sentences. But I would pull out a couple of words from the source material and list them, so you know what each paragraph is going to look like. That's really helpful. So I've listed 4 to 5 minutes, even 3 to 4 minutes might be more practical because you want as much time as you can have to write. But that's sort of what we call pre-writing. You're gathering ideas. And yes, you spend a few minutes doing this, but when you're organized, it actually saves you time in the long run. So you know what you'll be writing about. So what we've got here on the left-hand side, remember that when it comes time to write, you already will have read through the passage. We're not going to take the time to read this passage today, as we simply don't have the time. But you can see it says archaeology of food at the top. So I'm going to quickly scroll through there so you can see how long the academic passage is. And while we're doing that, I'm going to quickly outline some of the useful details that you would use. So again, the title, Archaeology of Food, that tells you what this is about. We would notice that. The topic is always introduced, or should be introduced, in the first paragraph. So make sure we review that. Every single paragraph that you see us going by, it's going to have one particular idea. And because this is all about food, obviously the main ideas will relate to food. Once you know the main focus of each paragraph, it's going to be about food in general terms. You then will find specific details. And it's your job to pull the details out that actually answer the question on the test. So you can't use all of these details. My goodness, there were 9 paragraphs or so? So this is the skill that takes the most amount of practice, I feel. It's skimming through quickly, focusing on only the details that relate back to the factor that you selected. So whatever you do feel is the most important factor that influences how and what we eat, those are the details you're going to look for. Don't waste your time looking at other things that don't relate, for sure. Yeah. Yes, and Luciana, just to clarify, thank you for asking in the Zoom chat there. This text set that you're using to do the writing, you already would have been given 20 minutes just beforehand to read through the whole passage, and you would have answered 11 multiple choice questions about it. So that text is pretty fresh in your mind. So again, the idea is that you should be able to skim it over fairly quickly, knowing what it's all about, and then pull out the relevant details. Yeah, you're not just starting from scratch here. That would be really tricky on a time test. Yeah, so great question. Thanks for asking that. Okay, and again, you're always supporting your own main idea. That's the name of the game. Remember, this long piece of writing also asks you to use the lecture notes. And as we said, you already would have heard this lecture. It's about 5.5 minutes long. You would have answered again about 11 multiple choice questions. So it's fresh, but you cannot listen again now that you know what the test question is for writing. So all you have to work from would be what I've got on screen. It's a summarized outline that the computer is presenting. So once again, we can see the title, at the top of this outline, it says food rituals in the past and present. So you notice there's a theme, right? Both of these reading and listening sources are about food. This one is focusing a bit more on past and present. So again, you're going to, just like we did in the reading passage, you're going to look through this outline of the lecture, look at the main ideas, and you'll notice in this outline, I'll just point them out here with the laser pointer. All these bulleted points are so helpful because you see subtitles like food, group food rituals, animal food rituals, non-religious food, and so on. Maya, ritualized feasts. So these will tell you the main ideas. And then, of course, if somehow you wanted to bring in something with animal food rituals, you would know to look there and start looking at the precise details. So I think sometimes pulling details from the listening is a bit easier because the outline's a lot shorter. So provided you can pull out even 2 points there that serve your purpose, I think you've covered that part of the test. There might be terms or definitions within this outline too that could make sense in your answer. It really all depends on what it is you're using that information for. But whatever you do, just look for details related to the question on the test that help with your opinion. So remember, you're picking one factor that has the most influence on how and what we eat. So once you've come up with that factor, you're focused on only details that are relevant to that so that you can start supporting your ideas through the essay. Okay, and again, 35 minutes to write the whole thing. So your outline, and when I said take about 3 or 4 minutes, maybe to think about how your essay will look before you start typing. Think about your introductory statement. Some of us might want to make one sentence just as an interesting thought or fact about food. In this case, food, because that's what the topic is. So the intro statement is usually quite general, but then immediately, at least by your second sentence, you're stating your position. This is the answer to the question. And for this test question, you are identifying the one factor that you think has the most influence, and you would have to state that. Whatever the factor is, influences greatly on how and what we eat in modern society today. That's what my opinion statement might sound like. You would have that would be your opening paragraph, by the way, really short. By the time you get to main idea 1, this is the next paragraph. We're now into the middle section of the essay, which is called the body. So you're going to state one reason why you think that factor is the most influential. You'll probably have at least 2, I'd say for time constraints, maybe 2 supporting details that explain how that factor influences us and so on. When you have another reason for why that same factor influences how and what we eat, you start a new paragraph. Again, you'll pull out a couple of details. Remember to balance between reading and listening. You could have a third main idea if you have time and if you've got an idea there, but if not, you might just be ready to go right to the conclusion as long as you've got 250 words. So your concluding paragraph for CAEL is not expected to be long and fancy. Again, you've got 35 minutes. The rating team knows that. So I would include maybe a couple of sentences at the most here. You can offer up one final thought about the topic. I myself like to make a prediction. I like to leave the reader with something I'm pondering for the future. So if we're talking all about the factor influencing how and what we eat, whatever factor I've identified, I might consider if that factor will continue to influence future societies. That would be a really fine way to end this all, just sort of giving the reader something to think about as we wind down. So that might work as well. But keep it short. Your main focus will be on the middle paragraphs with your main reasons and your supporting details, I would say. Let's go back to the intro, which I think is the easiest part to write. Your introductory statement, I would say 1 sentence, 2 at the most. But again, you're literally introducing the topic, something about food. You do want to get the reader's attention. So what we've got here, I've got the question up top again. What factor do you think influences us the most when determining how and what we eat? So there are 4 different possible introductory statements. These are all 1 to 2 sentences in length. Can I give you about 20 or 30 seconds to skim read those through? And in the Zoom chat box, let me know which one you think is the strongest. And if there's a consensus, we'll then start talking about why it's the best. Anyway, take a read through and let me know what you think. Okay, how are we going here? I'm hoping you've had time to read them through. Do you have a guess? I'm going to start just eliminating them one by one until we're left with the right answer, but I'm giving you a chance to jump in first. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we're not quite sure and we don't want to make the mistake. So I appreciate that. I tell you what, why don't I start eliminating some? And as we get down to a couple of choices left, perhaps somebody will be brave enough to make a guess there in the Zoom chat. So starting with part A, it says food is an important topic nowadays. It is an indisputable fact that humans all around the world enjoy food every day. This is not a great way to go. And the reason for that is it sounds very templated and quite general. And as a matter of fact, I would have to agree that most people enjoy food, but you can't accurately state it's an indisputable fact everybody enjoys, right? Like it's not a supportable idea. So it's definitely not the strongest one there. Looking down at part B, there is a common saying that health is wealth. In other words, being healthy is the most valuable thing in life. As nutrition is vital to health, we must make responsible dietary choices. I see some academic vocabulary there, but this question is, or this statement rather, is completely off topic. What this position is all about is how we have to choose food wisely to stay healthy. And when you look back up to the question up top, that's not at all what we're being asked to discuss. We are supposed to pick one factor that influences how and what we eat. It's not the same thing. So that's not right. Now you're down to two. Would anyone like to try to guess now? We've got a 50-50 chance. Which one of these two do you feel is better? Would you go with C or D if this was your essay? Give you about 5 seconds to make a guess there in Zoom chat. And now I'm going to reveal which one is wrong from this list. Looking at D, this is wrong. Although we may not always be aware of them, many factors influence us when determining how and what we eat. It's on topic, at least, but the reason why this is not the best choice is because we've copied the words almost directly from the test instructions. And as we said before, this is not the way to go. So we're left with C. This one's really good. Prehistoric humans likely wouldn't recognize much in the modern world, but archaeological findings show that their methods of obtaining and preparing food are still with us today. All the vocab there is academic in tone. The sentence structure is compound. We have details that match just about every part of this question. So we're talking about food. We are talking about influences on how and what we eat. So if you had to choose one, this is the best one. So we're going to place that right up here. All right. After you've got your introductory statement, the next thing we have to do is include, of course, our opinion. And this will be the factor that you're selecting. Mention your topic, state your view. Okay, let's do one more true or false, just because they're a bit easier perhaps to manage. When you begin with your opinion statement, whatever you think is the greatest factor here for food consumption, it says an opinion statement must include a phrase like, in my opinion, or I believe. Is this true or false? Do you have to start your statement with one of those two phrases? In my opinion, or I believe. And I'm glad to see that we are going with false in the Zoom chat. Yeah. I mean, you could use one of those two phrases if you really want to, but it's definitely not the only way to do it. So it's important to note that. So this is correct. You know, of the wide variety of factors that influence modern eating choices and habits, my opinion is that agriculture is the most significant. So agriculture, I guess, would be the factor chosen there. Or this is also correct. Just look at the different way we phrased it. Of the wide variety of factors that influence modern eating choices and habits, agriculture is the most significant. So whether you want to include the phrase that it's your opinion or not, it really doesn't influence the idea. We know this is your opinion because you are the one writing this essay and you've identified, in this case, agriculture. So again, just come into the test knowing that you do have a little bit of flexibility. I think learning structures and outlines is helpful, but you don't have to always abide by the exact same words. And that's great to know in any setting for sure. Let's do the opposite now. We've talked about what looks good for an opening statement, but what would not work. So I'm going to place 4 ideas here on screen, and I want us to identify the 2 that we just cannot use. either isn't correct or it does not make sense to do so when you're starting your essay. So when you state your opinion, what should you not do? Can we select maybe 2 of these letters into the Zoom chat? Again, you're looking for the weaknesses or the mistakes. Which ones would you stay away from? And there's a reason why I'm asking this, so stay tuned for that. Okay, I've got a few guesses coming in. Nice. Nice. Anybody else want to weigh in before I reveal? I'm liking what I'm seeing so far, if I'm honest. It's been suggested that B is incorrect, and I will definitely agree with you there. We never say this in English, and don't ask me why. Sometimes it's funny. I can't explain to you why that is, but it's just not done. And language is funny that way. Sometimes it's just the rule, and that's the way it goes. So according to me, I've heard students use this in the past. Perhaps it's used in other parts of the world. That could be it. I don't know for sure, as I've only ever lived in Canada. But we wouldn't say this in English, at least not here. So please don't use it. Strike this from your memory. It's not one to use. And the other one, there's a little bit of a debate going on in the Zoom chat right now. But the other one that I never want you to use is this one. I opine. I think once upon a time it might have been used, but like I said earlier, words sometimes come in and out of fashion. And this expression, I opine, is incredibly outdated, old-fashioned. It's also very, very unnatural. In fact, if you were to say this here in Canada anyway, some people might not even know what you mean because we never hear this word, I opine. So please never use these 2 expressions. You could use A or D. Again, these are just examples of other ways that you could start with your opinion, but there are many other ways. We won't take the time to list them, but you could say, in my view, from my perspective, I believe that, I would argue that. So again, there's just so many ways. I think it would be helpful for each of you to come up with a couple of different transit or phrases like this that could establish an opinion so that when you're writing on the test, you have an idea already in mind, because you could apply these to just about any opinion and they would make sense. So I would encourage you to do that. Okay, so what we have here is our completed introduction. I'll read the whole thing out loud one last time so you can see how it flows together for coherence. It says, prehistoric humans likely wouldn't recognize much in the modern world, but archaeological findings show that their methods of obtaining and preparing food are still with us today. Of the wide variety of factors that influence modern eating choices and habits, agriculture is the most significant. That's it. We're now finished. That is more than enough for an introduction on the CAEL test. 2 to 3 minutes tops will do it. We've got 2 sentences, sorry, minutes, I meant sentences. We have 2 sentences here. They are fairly long though. So again, I wouldn't write any more than that for the intro. So we started with an introductory statement all about basically finding, obtaining, preparing food. And then we get right into how agriculture is the most influential factor. Need to have it. And usually in that order. We almost always state our opinion in the last sentence of the introduction, as now we know exactly what we'll be talking about. So we're done with the intro. We're moving into the middle paragraphs, which I think are the hardest parts to write. So we'll call this the body paragraph. That's what we mean by the middle, the body section. This is paragraph 1. So can you take about 20 seconds just to skim read that over? There are definitely some strengths, but there are also some weaknesses. So we're going to make some corrections. You can also comment in the Zoom chat if there's something here that you think is done quite well. Feel free to let us know. But read it through and then we'll talk about it as a group. Okay, so I see some things that are impressive, but also some things that we'd like to make some improvements on. So I'm going to start off, let me just highlight that first sentence. Whoop. The first sentence is always supposed to be the topic sentence. And it does here state that agriculture is responsible for the food that we eat. So remember, agriculture is actually the factor that we're talking about. So it makes sense to bring that in as the first sentence here. Notice the transition, how we start with the word firstly. So that's a great way to connect ideas together. I think the content here works as well because we do have examples of both animals and crops that we eat. And so we have the what we eat, but we also read a little bit about how we store this food. And this question asks us how and what we eat. How is that factor influencing? The vocabulary too is pretty decent for the most part. So words like harvested, worldwide, ceramic jars, granaries, and so on. And most of the grammar is correct, but there are a couple of minor errors that I would like to find and revise with you. So again, here's our opening. Firstly, it is a fact that almost every single thing we eat is a food that is produced through agriculture. So let's just work on that one sentence just for a moment. It has some strengths, but there's a few things too that I think we could improve upon. So I'm going to place 4 different statements here, and I want us to be able to tell what is true about that opening sentence. So is it A, the main idea is unclear? B, there's a grammar mistake? C, there are unnecessary words? Or D, the information is off topic? I will give you 10 seconds to place your answer in the Zoom chat before I reveal it to you. What is true about that opening? Make a decision quickly. There we go. Some of the ideas are coming in. And we have some of us sort of torn between B and C by the looks of it. And you're half right. Yeah, one of those two is the right answer. And the answer that I'm looking for is actually this one. The sentence itself is not terrible. The idea is not terrible. I like that we have that transition. Firstly, we're still talking about agriculture, so it connects. That's the factor that we need to discuss. But there are ways that we can tighten up the wording and make this sound a lot more academic. Let's get rid of the unnecessary words. This is what we call fine-tuning your answer. What we have is acceptable, perhaps, but we can make it better. So step 1 would be to figure out which of these words are unnecessary in the first place. I don't think we need to say it is a fact that. So let's just strike that out altogether. Almost every single thing, well, the word every means the same as single in a way, so there's no need to say both. Everything we eat is a food. Well, what we eat is food. So once again, it's really not necessary to identify that as a food. So what we end up with when we remove these words that don't add a lot of value is the revised edition here on the right-hand side. Firstly, almost everything we eat is produced through agriculture. So that would be a lot more concise. We started off with 20 words and we ended up with 9 words. And these 2 sentences convey the same idea. But the rule here is that more is not definitely the best way to go. We never, ever want to use words that add no value at all. So once we've removed those unnecessary words, we still get, meaningful content. So we call this writing concisely. This is what we call concision. So you're avoiding redundancy. When you're redundant, it means that you're repeating unnecessary details. Again, like a food that we eat. Well, food is something we eat. We don't need to say both. So you're expressing your ideas in sort of the important words only. You're not wasting your time or your words and that sort of thing. All right. Anyway, now that we fixed that, look at how much shorter actually our first sentence is. Let's move on to that next highlighted sentence there. It says here, according to the reading passage, our distant ancestors domesticated animals like cows, sheep, chickens, ... known as an ellipsis. Okay, there are a couple of little tiny grammar mistakes here. I'm hoping you can find them. There are 3 of them that I can see. Very quickly, can you help me out in the Zoom chat? What would you fix here if this was your passage? Let's say you've got 3 minutes left on your time clock and you're reading back your work and you notice this sentence. What would you do to fix it up? Make it better. 3 minor errors is a lot to have in one sentence, in my opinion. So I think we better fix them. Here's one, right? So sheep is supposed to be plural. We don't want an apostrophe when we have a plural. And sheep, by the way, I don't think we say sheeps. The plural of sheep is just sheep. It's one of those exceptions, I believe. Because we're listing animals, cows, sheep, chickens, we want to put the word and before that final item in the list. And this was the easiest one. because we're at the end of our sentence, we're going to want to put either a semicolon or a period. When we use that ellipsis, what it means is that the idea is supposed to continue, and we don't want to use this in academic writing. It doesn't convey the right tone. So these are relatively minor fixes to make, but they're the types of mistakes that you're going to want to be able to catch on your own. So you can see the revised editions down there on the bottom in blue. That's all there is to it. So be on the lookout for these types of mistakes when you're reading back. Okay, so we've corrected now the grammar mistakes, but what happens is we've got two sentences that need to be combined together. So let's do that. Let's take these two sentences and figure out how we can combine them. So right now it says, according to the reading passage, our distant ancestors domesticated animals like cows, sheep, and chickens. These are the same animals we use for meat and eggs today. That's a pretty simple sentence there at the end. I would encourage you to try rewriting it like this. You know, instead of ending after chickens, why not put a comma and use the relative pronoun which? So we say, which are the same animals. You've got now a complex sentence structure, which will help you earn a higher score academically. Or if you don't want to use the word which, you could instead change up the punctuation. So instead of ending the sentence after the word chickens, we've included what's called a colon, a dot dot. So that allows us now to list ideas. So instead of saying these are, we're removing those very simple words and we're just stating now the same animals we use for meat and eggs today. And again, knowing both structures will help you because you want to showcase a variety of sentence structures on your test. So choose one or the other. I think they're both equally academic, and move on. So the next group here says, they farmed and harvested crops like wheat, barley, corn, and rice. These are still the most famous grains worldwide. Right off the top, I noticed something that I would like to fix, and I'm hoping you can help me. So what is true about the sentences above? So is it A, there's a grammar mistake? B, there's a word choice error? C, the tone is inappropriate? Or D, some information is off topic? What can you tell me about those sentences above there? These are the types of skills that I want you to be able to recognize on your own when you're proofreading your own work. Hopefully you've got a guess. And yes, it is B. There is a word choice error. So when you look at that sentence, I hope you recognized immediately that this is kind of strange. These are still the most famous grains worldwide. That doesn't make a ton of sense. The word famous is normally used as a word to describe something that is well known around the world, but that is loved by many people. It usually refers to either a person, a place, perhaps a piece of artwork like the Mona Lisa, the Eiffel Tower, things like this that everybody seems to know about around the world. And when you look at grains, grain is a fairly common crop that we would eat. I wouldn't consider grains to be famous. Instead, what we'd want to do is use a more natural word choice that conveys a more accurate meaning. Probably common would be how I would go. These are still the most common grains worldwide, or the most widespread, or prevalent. Here's a good one, ubiquitous. Ubiquitous means sort of like omnipresent, like these grains are basically everywhere around the globe and popular and so on. So again, coming into your test with a widely developed vocab will allow you to play around with the words a bit because you always want to make sure you're choosing natural words that make sense in the situation. So choose one. And it's just a matter of replacing that word famous with a better choice. So common grains worldwide. All right. Now we have, they farmed and harvested crops like wheat, barley, corn, and rice. These are still the most common grains worldwide. And we still have two weaknesses. And I'm going to give you an enormous hint. Here's a paragraph from the long reading. Can you have a look at what's written on the left as part of our test answer and do a quick little skim read over of the paragraph from the test on the right? And I'm hoping you're going to notice right away what the problem is. Ooh, Luciana is jumping in the Zoom chat already. I'm glad you're that quick about it too. Yeah, this happens often. So it's why I always remind us of what not to do. As Luciana has reminded us, most of what's written there on the left, as you can see now with the highlighted sections, all we've done is pretty much copied word for word out of the long reading passage. So I guess your content would be right then, right? At least if you're copying. So maybe that's a good thing, but you're not doing yourself any favors for vocabulary or sentence structure. You can't get credit for these ideas since they're not your own. So we don't want to copy anything. And on top of it, when you look back to what we wrote on the left, the grammar is correct per se, but the two sentences rather, are simple. They're almost the same length, and we want to try to avoid that if we can help it. So it's a matter of paraphrasing, using our own words to rewrite the copy part. Let's do that first. So for farmed and harvested, shouldn't be too hard to come up with words that mean the same. Could we say something like grew or cultivated, produced? You know, there are many words that would mean the same thing. So pick one that would come from our own mind. And we've got here wheat, barley, corn, and rice. That's quite a list of grains that we've taken right out of the reading passage. When you are paraphrasing, you do not need to include every single item from the list. What I would do is probably choose one or maybe two at the most to make a point, but don't copy them all. I don't think that's the best way to go. And these words, crops and these, well, when we say these are still the most common in the second part, we're referring back to the word crops anyway. So one easy way to revise this whole thing would be like so. The crops they grew, including rice and wheat, are still the most common grains worldwide. Much, much better, right? On the left, yeah, it's acceptable. It makes sense, but it's a little bit on the general or simple structure. On the right, we've got a more academic and more refined piece of writing. So that's what we're aiming for. On to our next highlighted section. It says, and they had more food than they can eat immediately. It's necessary to make some stuff to keep it fresh, like ceramic jars for small quantities and granaries for large ones. I see multiple errors there, multiple grammar mistakes. I'll give you about 10 seconds just to have a look through. You're welcome to identify the errors in the Zoom chat, or at least just in your own mind at home, recognize what they are. And we'll go very quickly through and fix them all up. Yep, I see the word stuff as well. Luciana is saying, that's not a great word to use. I don't even like to use that word in my day-to-day conversations just because it doesn't tell us anything. It's really, really vague. So that's definitely one to use. Did you notice how we're starting this sentence though? Right at the very beginning, about 99.9% of the time, we're not supposed to start our sentence with the word and it looks like Luciana got that one too. So this is a transition, and the word and should go in the middle of ideas to connect them together. So we're going to come up with a better transition in just a moment, but that's definitely the first mistake. The other one I was hoping somebody would notice, but nobody did. And perhaps it's because it's actually quite an easy mistake to make. We've got verb tense mistakes, right? We shouldn't be writing in the present tense. Look at the way this sentence started. They had more food. That's past tense. So there's no reason to switch to the present tense with can and it's or it is. So that's a mistake. The most major mistake I would argue is here. These are two different sentences, but what the person did, instead of finishing that sentence and beginning fresh with the word it's, they just put in a little comma, and we can't do that. We have to either add in a joining word or use a full stop or a semicolon. So we've created what's known as a run-on sentence, and these types of mistakes sometimes are confusing for the reader to read through because there's just too much detail. So that's one we definitely want to fix. We've already identified stuff. It's very vague. It's not academic in the least. Okay, so instead of saying and, well, we could use maybe one of these. Also, furthermore, moreover, in addition, additionally. There are lots and lots of ways that you could express that. So pick one. Let's say you like furthermore. Sure, we can do it that way. As far as the verb tenses go, relatively straightforward. We know that these have to be in past tense now, right? So that everything makes sense. Had, could, and was. That shouldn't be too hard to fix up. This is maybe the harder part. It was necessary to make some stuff. Well, we need to get rid of that word. I think the word make, we can do better. There are many ways you could express the word make when you're talking about food. So there's a small list of words that would be more interesting. Arguably, you could keep in the word some. You could use that in academic language, but you do have some choices instead if you'd rather. It's the word stuff, though, that is the biggest mistake. So if we're talking about putting food in stuff to keep it fresh, why don't we talk about storage containers or storage receptacles or storage vessels? Those are so much more interesting than stuff. So the whole thing looks like so. Create various storage containers to keep the food fresh. We have that run-on sentence. So again, we've got choices. We could just break that idea into two sentences, or we could add in a joining word. If you separate these two sentences into their own sentences, what happens is you don't have as much coherence, you don't have as much fluency, and the complexity goes down. So even though you could just turn that comma into a period and make two separate sentences, it's probably best to add in a conjunction, which is a joining word, because it's making a complex sentence structure, and it's also going to connect those ideas together in a way that conveys better meaning to the reader. So right now it says, furthermore, they had more food than they could eat immediately. We want to put a word there and connect it to, it was necessary to create various storage containers to keep it fresh. So we have to recognize the relationship between these ideas. And if they have so much food, they can't eat it all, they need storage containers then as a result. This would be a cause and effect situation. And there's more than one word you could use to suggest cause and effect. You could use because, you could use as, you could use since. So this is one way to do it. So furthermore, as they had more food than they could eat immediately, it was necessary to create various storage containers to keep it fresh, like ceramic jars for small quantities and granaries for large ones. That's one complex sentence. So we're racking up the points, if you will. And then we have our final sentence here. Modern societies use the same methods to ensure steady access to agricultural products, even in seasons when those items can't be produced. Again, there's one mistake, and I'm not sure, this is a tough one to identify, so I'll give you about 10 seconds to figure it out, and then I'm happy to point it out to you. This one is a major mistake, and I really want us all to be able to fix it on our own when the time comes. Yeah, I'm not surprised we're struggling with this. It's a hard one. There's an issue with this final idea here. Yeah, it's not even a complete sentence. It's what's known as a sentence fragment. And a fragment occurs when we're missing either the subject or the verb or predicate, or sometimes even both. So there are a couple of ways to fix it. And actually, Luciana has suggested one of those ways. You can certainly combine that fragment, connect it back to the sentence before it. And by doing so, oftentimes it includes either adding in a conjunction to smooth things out together. So this says modern societies use the same methods to ensure steady access to agricultural products, comma, even in seasons when those items can't be produced. So in this case, it was possible just to connect them together. In other cases, you might be adding words in to smooth them out. But yeah, these are the types of mistakes. They're tricky to spot, but when you're able to correct them yourselves, it's going to really elevate the complexity and academic tone of your writing for sure. So I won't read this all out to you. You will get this in your study pack later on today anyway, but at least by looking at the color coding here, I'm hoping it's starting to make sense as far as the structure goes. So this is, remember, the middle paragraph, right? We've already done the intro before. So the middle paragraph, because we're trying to identify agriculture as the most influential factor, we're starting by reminding the reader that's what we're talking about. Almost everything we eat is produced through agriculture. So that's our focus or the main idea. We have 3 different details, and they are listed there in different colors, so you can easily see them. The first 2 details explain what we eat, and we do get information about both plants and animals. So we're giving a very well-rounded answer here. That third detail, it's building on the first 2, and we know that because we've got the word furthermore, so we understand we'll have a continuation with more details to more fully extend or explain. And this is getting a lot more into how we eat. So we have addressed the what, and we've also addressed the how in this paragraph, which is exactly what we're being asked to do for this question. Okay, now for the second body paragraph, we're not going to go into it in quite as much detail, I'd like to build it actually from the beginning instead of working through a finished product. So we have here the opening sentence on screen. We're starting with the word secondly. So we understand, of course, that this is the second main idea. And notice we're still talking about agriculture. We have to. That's the one factor that we've selected. So we have to continue to discuss how it influences us. But we've got here, agriculture is strongly connected to rituals, as the lecturer explained. So we have a slightly different focus, right? We will be precisely describing rituals and how food was established there. Notice that these ideas are coming directly from the listening passage, because you have to identify material from both reading and listening. So somewhere in your writing, just like we've demonstrated here, ways you might go about doing that. If it's a reading passage, you can refer to it as the long reading, the reading passage, the text. If it is a listening passage like the one above, you could list it in any one of these fashions. So the long listening, the lecture, the listening passage, the lecturer or professor or instructor explained. So come into this CAEL test, again, with a good variety of words so that you can change up your language, so that you're not repeating yourself with different ideas. The last thing I'll mention here about identifying which source you're using is we want to get the verb tenses correct. So if you're dealing with the listening passage, you're going to use past tense verbs, believe it or not. The lecturer stated, or in this case, explained. And that's because the lecture has already played and is finished and will not play any longer. If, however, you are referencing the reading passage, try to remember to use the present tense. So this is the second example down. The reading passage states or describes that, And the reason for that is because even though you've already read the passage, and I guess technically that happened in the past, those ideas are still in front of you and ring true moving forward. So we refer to them in the present tense as kind of like a common or habitual way to explain. So it sounds really picky, but these are rules, again, that if you start learning them now and practicing them now, they'll become automatic as you get into your own academic writing and through school and so on. All right. So we have here, secondly, agriculture is strongly connected to rituals, as the lecturer explained. Some ancient rituals arose as a direct result of farming, such as, so what I'm going to do is place the lecture notes. This would be on the computer facing you. So let's skim through these lecture notes to find details that we could actually add into the writing. So if we're talking about ancient rituals arising as a direct result of farming, you're looking for one example of a ritual that was used with farming. So I'll give you just, I don't know, 10 seconds maybe. Can you skim it over and see if you can find it? Look for the keywords like ritual, farming. Farming, I guess, would be animals or plants. Oh, I see it right there. Do you notice under where it says animal food rituals? We've got two very precise examples that we could choose to use. It does talk about crop harvest there. So we want to take the information from the lecture notes, which talks about how the Inca civilization offered llamas and alpacas to the gods. And it says ensured food security, good crop harvests. So we want to take that information and we want to somehow make it our own, paraphrase that into our own vocabulary. So something like this would work, such as the Inca sacrificing animals. Well, that's the same as the notes that says the civilization offered llamas. We're going to go with the word sacrificing. It's our own vocab. And instead of just llamas and alpacas, you've used the word animals, which is fine. And last but not least, rather than ensured food security, we've said in exchange for bountiful crops. So again, same exact idea. It's just that we're using our own language, and that's the better way to go if you can. And then we've continued on. That's the new yellow part here. Other rituals featured specific agricultural products such as, let's do the same thing. So here are the lecture notes. So take a quick moment there, have a little skim read over the notes on screen and see if you can find other examples of rituals involving agricultural products. So look at the subheadings, and then we'll pull out a couple of details that would make sense. It looks like we've got 3 subheadings that use the word rituals. We're talking about agricultural products. So why not look here? We're still under, this one talks about non-religious food rituals. But if we're trying to focus in on agricultural products, I see things that are all about the Maya's feasts, and we get examples of some of the food items they use there. So that would be a pretty strong example, I would argue, to use. So once again, it's just a matter of taking what's in the lecture notes and rewriting it in our own words. So we could say something like this. Other rituals featured specific agricultural products, such as the tamales eaten at feasts that the Maya held after defeating an enemy or choosing a king. So we took one example. You notice we didn't list all 3, turkey and chocolate. We just took the one, tamales, and we mentioned they were eaten at feasts, which is fine. Now the Maya, you can't paraphrase that word because it's the name of a civilization. So we certainly can use that particular word. And this part, we did a little bit of playing around with the words. And because we know that wars were won from the notes, we've just rearranged the words. So after defeating an enemy, and again, new kings was mentioned. So we've just inserted that, choosing a king. So these are probably the hardest skills that you'll need to learn for your academic writing if you're trying to reference the source material. It's always first understanding which details make sense to support your point. And second, it's learning how to paraphrase them so that you're making the writing your own. Okay. Last but not least, we've got here agricultural products are prominent in modern rituals as well. For example, now it's not necessary to think of your own examples on the CAEL writing, but if you're worried about your word count, or if you've got time to add in some of your own personal examples, I think it's helpful to do so. Again, it's giving a pretty well-rounded response when we do it that way. So mentioning any modern rituals involving food will strengthen your argument. Here's one way to do it. We went with birthdays and Christmas. That's very common here in Canada, and that's what we've stated. So it says here, for example, a typical Christmas dinner in Canada includes a farm-raised turkey, as well as grain and vegetable side dishes. Birthdays are celebrated with cake, whose ingredients include flour, sugar, eggs, and milk. So all of that was our own idea. Again, it's a nice addition if you've got the time and desire. But here's what we ended up with. For our second paragraph, we've got the main idea up top. We are still talking about agriculture, but it's connected to rituals precisely. And notice every single idea here is associated with a ritual of sorts. Your first detail in blue is talking about how and what a past culture is eating. The yellow one, the second detail, again, how and what the past culture ate, speaking about the Mayan civilization. And that third one is now about the present culture. It's how and what we eat here. So it's a really nice way to connect all of these ideas as well. All right. Now here's what the writing would look like on your computer screen. I won't read it all out to you. You'll get it in your study pack. But this is just for length's sake. This is what we've written so far. So again, just to summarize the features of your middle paragraphs, we've only got the 2 paragraphs, which is fine, right? You could have 3 depending on how many more reasons you come up with. The main thing though is to separate your paragraphs by leaving that one blank space, that one empty line between them. That's really important. On average, your paragraphs will probably be between 4 to 6 sentences each. And when I say sentences, I do mean complex sentences, so they're a little bit longer. But the length that you see in front of you would be a very good goal to aim for as you practice from home. It's not 100% necessary to have the main idea in the first sentence, but I think it's helpful, especially when you have time constraints on a test like the CAEL. So most of us would place that main idea first, and then we know exactly what we're writing about all the way through. And within the body or the middle, the rest of the paragraph will say, that's where you're putting all of your precise details, and you're going to use both sources, right? The reading and the listening, which we've done a really decent job of here today. So that leaves us just with the conclusion. So let's get into that. Again, we're going to look at some factors and decide which side of the screen they belong to. So decide really quickly, should we be repeating ideas from the introduction in the conclusion of your essay? Yes or no? Quickly in the Zoom chat, let me know. Yes or no? Y or N even if you want. And yeah, you're right. We shouldn't be doing this. No, don't repeat ideas from the intro in your conclusion because you've already stated those ideas. What's the point of repeating them, right? So don't do that. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't even restate your opinion. We'll talk about that in a second. Your conclusion should be anywhere from 1 to 3 sentences for the CAEL test. So keep it short, to the point. It doesn't necessarily mean, though, that your conclusion will be less formal. It still has to have an academic tone to it, even though it will be quite a bit shorter than those middle paragraphs. This is my favorite way to conclude any type of essay. Either make an observation, in this case about agriculture influencing food practices, or predict if it's going to change, if agriculture will continue to be a factor in the future. That would be the best way to go there. It's not necessary here to restate your main ideas because you've already discussed them. So here's an example of a conclusion. I'll read it out loud briefly. It says, ultimately, ancient farmers are responsible not only for most of the items on our grocery list, but also for a long list of technological developments and social rituals that will no doubt continue through future generations. So notice we haven't copied or repeated any ideas from the two-body paragraphs or the introduction that we wrote earlier. We've ended here with an observation that is connecting past and present with the future. And this is appropriate because the question is asking about eating habits over time. So this is a really effective conclusion for sure. Most important things to remember, again, I'll just wrap it up. Keep it short. This is only one sentence that you see. I would say 1 to 3 sentences maximum. Don't repeat any ideas. Just sum up what you're talking about with an observation or even a prediction that relates back to the topic at hand. So the finished response looks like this. Typical structure, 4 paragraphs. Again, the middle paragraphs will be the longest. That's important. Save some time on your actual test, though, to do the proofreading. So I would save 3 minutes if you can. You're going to read the whole thing front to back or beginning to end. Look at your paragraph structure and make sure that you've left that space between each paragraph. Double check all of your grammar and spelling are correct. Make sure your sentences are varied and complex. You might have to add transitions to smooth the connections out. And have a good look at your vocab. Make sure it sounds academic and does not repeat the same words over and over again. And finally, make sure you've answered the question fully. If you've missed something, now is a chance perhaps to add in an idea. So 3 to 4 minutes, no more than 5. Again, you need time to write the actual essay, but do proofread at the very end. You will receive this particular example in your study pack later today, so you can review it at leisure from start to finish. Notice it's 288 words. So we went over the 250 word minimum by a little bit. So that would be perfectly acceptable. I can't tell you what score this would have received because, of course, we wrote it together and it wasn't done in a testing room, etc. But do rest assured it does follow all of the requirements for the CAEL test. It would score very well if it was an actual answer. Okay, so we're done with the long writing. We have just a little bit to do yet today here on the short writing, and this is going to be a lot quicker because it's a short piece of writing. So remember, the short writing is only one paragraph of about 100 words, and that's why you only get 10 minutes. The good news is you are going to be asked to use either the reading or the lecture, not both. So the rating checklist is quite a bit shorter, as you can imagine. As a result, we don't have a lot of the long paragraph structure elements to assess here. You still have to remain on topic, whatever the question is asking you. You still must use examples and details to support your ideas and answer the question on the test. But the short writing does not need, of course, more than one paragraph. You don't even have to have an introductory statement. You just state your answer to the question at hand. You're not generally giving your opinion at all. You're answering the question, and you're not even going to use both sources, nor do you need a conclusion. It's a lot shorter than what we've done earlier. So as you're starting this short piece of writing, again, we have to read the question and fully understand what it's asking us to talk about. You only have 10 minutes, so make your skim through the source material very quick. You're going to look through, if it's the reading passage, skim it over and find 2 or 3 ideas that relevantly answer the question. I would make some notes and jot them down before I forget. That would be my advice. Right? You will not have time to add in your personal opinions here. So your short paragraph for part 5 is going to rely solely on the source material. I would aim for, again, 3 details if you can. And organize them. Make sure you're explaining them in your own words too, even in your notes and when you're typing it out. So because you've got 10 minutes total, like 30 seconds to 1 minute is really all you can afford to pull the details out of the source. And then you want to actually get typing because you need to finish before time is up. So here is an example of, again, a past CAEL test for a short paragraph. So this one, notice it says, based on the reading passage, what are the categories of joints in the human body? Give an example of each. So as you read that through, the first thing you notice is you're only looking at the reading. Please do not look at the listening or you are not following instructions. And we know that we have to discuss the categories of joints. We're asked what they are. So we're going to have to identify the categories. Likely that would involve defining what they are or where they are in the body and then give an example, right? So a lot going on in such a short piece of writing. So we're being asked here, well, where in the long reading would you expect to find the categories? And I would argue probably at or right near the beginning of the passage. So what I'd like to do is place the first 2 paragraphs of this reading source on screen. Remember, before you get to the paragraph writing, you already would have read through the entire reading passage and answered questions about it. So it's fairly fresh. That right now in this particular webinar, we haven't yet seen the reading passage. So I've got the first 2 paragraphs there on screen. Can you identify which of these 2 paragraphs actually gives us the information? We're looking for how many categories of joints there are and basically what they are. So I'll give you about a minute to skim this over, and then we'll identify where we can find the information in the passage. Okay, we've got some guesses coming in, which is great. And I should have qualified this by saying it's a little bit of a trick question here, but it looks like we're going with paragraph 2, and I'm pleased to see that you do have the right idea. And in fact, I'll highlight in yellow now where it is that you're going to find this information. So you see in paragraph 2 where it actually says joints can be classified based on their physical structure. They consist of the following categories. See that dot, that colon? That means that you're going to get a list of the names or the names of the categories. So it looks like, yep, there's 3 of them: fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints, and synovial joints. Okay, now I'm an English teacher. I'm not familiar with the biology of the human body, and I've heard of some of these words, but not all of them. I'm guessing maybe you're in the same boat, and this is normal on the CAEL test. So what we're going to have to do is rely on our ability to understand the structure here. We know that these are the names of the joints because of the way it's written, because of the way it's listed. And we'll get all the information we need here right from the passage. So again, we saw words like this: type of joint, right? And then classified. All of this is leading us to the right idea. Following categories, and then we've got all the joints listed. So it would not be hard to write 100 words once you've identified the 3 joints and given examples about them, which you would find if you continue to read. The reason why I said this was a little bit of a trick is because in paragraph 1, you did see a few of these keywords from the question. So it did say a joint is defined as, but that doesn't talk at all about the categories of joints. It's just defining in general terms what a joint is. And then it gets a little bit into the purpose of the joints. And the rest of that is all about how they let us move and so on. But again, even though we're talking about joints, it's not answering the actual question. We're being asked to focus on the categories of joints, giving examples of each. And we find that in paragraph 2. So part of your job on any language test, especially with the time limit, it's knowing where to look and which information is going to help you out as you're designing your answer. Very, very important to do that. Anyway, right. So again, based on the reading passage, what are the categories of joints? And give an example. So let's look at it this way. If this were my answer, this is probably what it would look like. You would take this loose outline. So you might have an introductory sentence. You have to say something about joints in the body to get us started. And then at some point, and I suppose it wouldn't matter what order you talked about these joints, but it would likely be easiest just to list them in the same order that they appeared in the reading material. So fibrous, cartilaginous, and synovial. These are complex words that might be new to us, but there is no excuse for misspelling these words, by the way. You're copying them right out of the text, so please make sure you are spelling them the right way. For each of these joints, I think just defining what they are, giving the meaning, and the text will tell you, and then giving an example of where in the body you would find these joints. And then the paragraph writes itself if you go into it with this approach, understanding that this is what it would look like. So we've got 3 example sentences here to start us off with an introduction. Can you read them through and let me know which one you think is the strongest? If this was your test question, how would you begin? Let me know which one's the best. I can tell you what not to do if that's helpful. Please never do this. I still see this every now and then. There are 3 categories of joints in the human body. I will describe and provide an example of each. So again, we've copied almost word for word from the question, but it's also quite, what's the word now? It's general, but a little bit too templated and scripted, almost unsophisticated, if you will. We never in academic writing bluntly explain, I will describe and provide an example. Take yourself out of it and get right to the point, if that makes any sense. All right, now it looks like some people are selecting C, and I was just about to say, C is not the best choice either. And the reason for that is because it is a hook. You might use that if you were writing an essay, but for the short writing on the CAEL test, again, you've got 100 words and 10 minutes. So it is not necessary to get into a hook for the short writing. If you included one, it wouldn't be wrong, right? But we just want to make sure that you have time to actually get the entire answer delivered. So I wouldn't worry so much about that interesting hook like you might do for a longer piece of writing. This one gets right to the point, and then you can develop it and you will have a better opportunity of finishing in 10 minutes. So it says joints form connections between bones, and in the human body, they are classified into 3 types. Right to the point. That's a great introduction there. One sentence will do it. It's a very clear topic. We know there are 3 types of joints. We're not giving an opinion. We wouldn't have an opinion anyway, I suppose. And we're not taking the time to bother with a hook. So that would be the best way to start, I would say. Right? And then you would write the entire essay. We won't finish writing that short essay now due to time constraints, but we will look at a completed response on the very next slide. Let's pretend for a moment we've written the whole thing. Again, you've got 10 minutes, but I do want you to save yourself at least 30 seconds, possibly a minute, depends how fast you can type. You do want to check for the same exact writing skills that we proofread through with the essay. Look at your paragraph skills. So did you intro your topic and have your details in the middle with examples? Fix any grammar, spelling mistakes. Make sure the sentences are complex and you've answered the question, etc. If not, fix it if you can before time is up. So here is the completed short writing response. It's one example of. It starts with that same introductory statement that we just looked at together. So what I'd like us to do, if we can, as we're coming to the end here of our webinar, there are actually 5 different types of mistakes throughout the rest of that response there on the bottom. I'll give you about a minute to skim it over. And if you could identify even a couple of those mistakes on your own, that would be a really good start. So feel free to let me know in the Zoom chat when you find a mistake. Okay, that should be enough time just to get through that paragraph. The most obvious, well, maybe it's not obvious, I don't know. But to me, the most obvious mistake, it's not even a language thing per se, it's more of a structural element here. So sometimes, I don't know why, but sometimes people will do this. And I'm here to say, please don't do this. This would be a major mistake as far as your formatting goes. You never want to separate ideas within the same paragraph. So you want to connect that opening sentence to the rest. Don't leave a space there. It's completely unnecessary altogether. All right. I also see a spelling mistake. This is minor. So if you made a spelling mistake like this, honestly, it wouldn't really affect your score, but you're trying your very best to minimize errors. It's a picky thing, but again, we have a space error. So when you've got an end punctuation mark, you definitely want to hit the space bar to make sure that the words, the sentences themselves are spaced out, and it makes it easier to read. This is a common error. Please do not capitalize random words in the middle of your sentences. The only words in the middle of a sentence that are capitalized would be names, names of people, places, or things, or perhaps titles as well, but never just common nouns like you see here. And I'd say maybe one of the more serious mistakes would be this one. This is a subject-verb agreement error. So hip joints is our subject and it's plural. So we also want a plural verb. Hip joints, for example, allow our legs to move backward and forward and so on. All right, and again, you're going to get this completed response. This is the revised version. You can see at the top there, it's 107 words. So it's just about perfect. We were asked to write 100 words minimum. So you'll get this in your study pack and you can read it over later on just to see how all the ideas connect as well. But suffice it to say, we can't score it because again, it was written by us as an example, not by a test taker in a testing room. But I can tell you that if this was a real CAEL response, it would certainly score very highly. It's got complex language. We've now fixed up all the tiny little grammar mistakes. We've not copied any ideas directly from the reading passage either. And we've answered the question. So this is exactly the process that I want you to start thinking about in your own writing, of course. We're going to finish off today's session here. I wanted to briefly remind you about that academic success bundle. So if you've not already registered for the CAEL test, when it comes time to do so, please remember to use the code CAEL25 to save 25% off your actual test registration. And then you'll get all of those free products there included to help you study. You don't have to pay for them separately. We usually do 1 to 2 CAEL webinars each month. So please check our website. If you go to cael.ca/webinars, you'll see the next sessions that are upcoming. So these webinars are all free, but you would have to register so we can give you the Zoom link, exactly like we did today. We also have an official YouTube channel named CAEL Official. You will find some test series there that will help you study as well. And these are free to access. There is a prep series there that I did a couple years ago now. It's simply called CAEL Prep with Brandy, for lack of a better word. So that would be me. I'm Brandy, the one there in the green shirt. About 40, I think there's about 42 episodes, and they should be organized by playlist. So if you're struggling still with writing, please go on and have a look at other writing examples and so on. We have 2 free CAEL sample tests right on the website as well. We've got study guides, we've got practice tests for purchase. There is an Accelerate program as well you could purchase, which is an online course, and so on. There's a textbook, a vocabulary builder. So have a little peek around the store. cael.ca/store will bring you there. And do remember, again, please take advantage of the online tests that are available to you for free. My advice would be to take our webinars first so you know what to do, and then try these out at home when you're refreshed and see how they go for you. All right. The study guide too, you can download for free. And again, 11 more tests for purchase if you wanted to. An online course you could work through. Another online course, Practice Test Plus, so lots of skill building and a complete practice test included. The Focus series is a textbook, but it's for the serious academic student. It will certainly help you prepare for CAEL, but also once you start studying at university, I think you'll find these activities very useful. So there's lots, and it'll keep you busy for months on end, no doubt. Lots of activities to get through, a little bit of vocabulary help, and so on. So that brings us to the end of our session today. I'll leave you with this little screen here. Might want to take a screenshot even, as it gives you the customer service email up top and reminders of our social media channels where you can find other prep So if there are no further questions, I will wish you a very pleasant day, and I hope to see you back at a future webinar. Thanks for joining us today, folks, and we'll see you another time. Bye-bye.